Welcome to this episode of Ed Circuit Author Chats. I'm pleased to be joined today by Danielle Nuhfer. Danielle's first book, The Path to the Mindful Teacher, is now available from Catt Educational. Danielle's been teaching for 20 years, studying mindfulness for 10, and combining those fields for the last half a decade. She is the founder of Teaching Well. She's an ICF certified coach and a mindful schools instructor. And she provides teacher wellness, coaching, and other services to time-crunched teachers trying to find time for self-care. And that is a topic that I know our listeners have been struggling with, thinking about, and it's been on their minds. So this is a very critical and timely topic. And Danielle, it's great to have you on Author Chat.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
I think we can get right into it here, which is the subtitle of your book is How to Choose Calm Over Chaos and Serenity Over Stress, One Step at a Time. And I assume, as we said, you've been teaching for 20 years and studying mindfulness for the last 10. In the earlier part of your career that you may have felt overcome by that stress and chaos that so many teachers feel. How did you experience that? And then how did you get started to engage in mindfulness practices?
So you're exactly right. In my early part of teaching, it was very, very stressful. I came into the teaching profession in around 2001 in the United States, where No Child Left Behind was becoming a big mandate. And I had been trained at a college that didn't really talk about that. So I was ready to, I was bright-eyed and ready to go with all the wonderful things I was taught in college, and that was not my reality. I taught in wonderful school districts, but it just wasn't the reality of what was actually happening in schools. And I really didn't know what I was doing, which is probably common for many teachers, but it was very, very difficult to figure out what I was doing. And I guess even now still, there's about a 5-year span of time where a lot of teachers leave the profession within their first 5 years. And I was coming up to my 5th year, and I don't know what happened first. If I was going through a lot of personal things that then impacted my teaching, or teaching impacted my personal life, but I definitely got to a point of burnout where I write about it in the book that I was in my principal's office, and he just, he was like, what is going on? Something needs to change. I want to help. He was very supportive, and it kind of woke me up, and I was like, I don't want to leave this profession that I love. And I happened to be close to summer vacation, of course. And I was like, I'm going to try to figure out something. And I found mindfulness. I found a lot of other self-help and self-care, and just really dove in during that summer. So that was about 5 years in. And what I found is I found doing things outside of the school day to be very helpful, but it still didn't really manifest itself into my classroom. I felt better, but there was still something going on. And again, I started to feel better. And I discovered mindfulness practice about 5 years after that first burnout, when I was going through another bout of burnout, because it just didn't quite do the job. And I realized how much I could take a lot of what I was doing outside of school and really implement it into what I was doing daily. It wasn't something that anybody modeled around me. So it was really difficult to get myself to do this, because I think I also say in a lot of places that I write about these things, teachers wear a busy badge. We wear busyness as a badge of honor. And I didn't have many role models around me saying take a break, go home when the bell rings. Nobody was doing that. So I had to really be my own self-advocate. And that's what I'm hoping to share through this book is here's a path that you can take. Many people might not be taking it around you, but this is what you can, these are some things that I've found that have really been helpful in my journey from complete burnout to not being so burnout. It's not perfect, but it's much better than before.
And to your point about your early career experience and how critical that period is to ensuring that you're effective as a teacher even earlier in your career, and your students are getting what they need out of you, but also to feeling like you're growing in the profession and staying in the profession. There were a number of great endorsements of the book, but one was offered by my friend and fellow Catt author Jethro Jones, and he said this should be required reading for all first-year teachers, right? And these challenges of stress and chaos and burnout are present at every level of your career at every stage. But I really do love that idea of saying from day one, new teachers should be properly inducted into the profession with an understanding of self-care and finding balance from the start. This is just part of being an educator. Let's not wait until you're a couple of years into it and you're just wondering, is this ever going to get easier, or is this for me? So that message is really for principals, right? Especially. And what would you say to principals about, why that early career period is so critical, or why this is just, when we hire new teachers, this just needs to be what we do. Let's not wait until there's a problem, because there will be one. Everybody faces it. So we just need to start with this right away.
So I think one of the things that I've realized is how invaluable retaining teachers can be to the culture and climate of a school. And I think the only way that we're going to do that is that if we offer exactly what you said, the support from the beginning, because we have students. I teach at a high school, so our students come through in 4 years, if all goes well. They're there for 4 years, but teachers are there. We want them to be there for so much longer than that. So if we can support them from the beginning and we retain them, and then they are the ones that are, manifesting this, healthy well-being, this picture, then we are going to impact our students at a much greater level. So that's what I would say to teachers or to principals who are thinking like, well, this isn't really, worth it. We want to help teach our students. Of course we want to help students, but we have to help our students maintain social emotional regulation, doing all those things by starting with our teachers.
Yeah, and amid everything else, we're also recording this as we're getting closer to back to school 2021, hopefully emerging from the most challenging parts of the pandemic, but it's certainly not in the rear view yet. And these past 2 years have taken an additional toll on, perhaps particularly on teachers beyond the usual, because of the way schools have been affected and the new things teachers have had to learn how to do, the new ways they've had to support students beyond everything they already were doing. But I have also observed from conversations I've had with educators in all different kinds of roles that perhaps it has forced somewhat of a perspective shift on some of these issues, and forced people to maybe face the importance of really committing to both social emotional support for students and for staff and faculty. It maybe accelerated that basically in a way that some folks maybe in the past knew it was important but couldn't find the time, or avoided grappling with it. But I mean, do you think from your work and from the people you've spoken with, do you think that this has given educators maybe some new perspective on the importance of wellness and some more receptiveness?
I do. I think that's a great point to be made, because I think that that's what I try to do, is find that silver lining in these last 2 years, and that is certainly one of them. I find that teachers are definitely more receptive to these concepts, and I feel like administrators are coming around to this because they're hearing it and they're seeing it, and it's not just within 1 or 2 school districts. Like, we are all going through this pandemic and have been, and dealing with it in many different ways. But the biggest thing I keep hearing everybody come back to is building relationships, creating community. And of course, we thought that was important before the pandemic. Of course it was. But now we've kind of been forced into, really looking at this and really saying, like, here are our problems, here are where we're lacking. And I do see this as an opportunity, or I try to see this as an opportunity for administrators maybe to have a different, even though maybe they were giving lip service to some of these things before, really starting to say, how can we support these people in the best way that will then support our students? I always just keep trying to come back to that. Teacher self-care, teacher wellness funnels down to our students.
Yeah, that's the concept, of course, that stress is contagious, but also just that if it's something that's inhibiting your effectiveness, then of course that's going to limit the effectiveness of the learning that students can have, because that's why you're there. Right? That's why every teacher is there. That's why you're putting this hard work into it. And that's why the challenges and stress of the profession are there. It's because you care about what you're doing and you want to do the best possible job. But there, of course, are factors that can make that a challenge. What do you typically find for teachers who are either new to some of your approaches or who are just kind of having a hard time committing to wellness and mindfulness practices? What are typically the hardest things for them to kind of accept? Is it that self-care feels selfish to them? Is it that they just have no idea, like, how do I make enough time for this? My schedule is full. Is it that it's just hard to accept what we can't control and just to kind of come to an acceptance of that? What's the thing or the couple of things that are just most frequently, okay, this is the one we really have to get past?
Well, I think you pointed out three really great ones. So I think you hit the nail on the head that a lot of teachers, I think, come from a place of mixing that self-care feels selfish and I don't have time. And that those two work really well together to help us not do the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves. So what I try to do is to help teachers think about how self-care is actually selfless. And I use this example that if I'm not taking care of myself, if I'm at my, I'm not sleeping right, I'm taking work home all the time. When I come into my classroom, I have much less patience. I have much less to give to my students. Whereas if I would take maybe 10 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes to go for a walk after school in between school and work, maybe I'm giving myself just enough of that where I have built in a little bit more patience into being able to show up with my students in a much different way. So it doesn't need to be I think the other script that people say or falsehood people think is that self-care needs to be some indulgent thing, some luxurious like thing that you buy. But really what I teach is that self-care is just pockets of mindful moments where you're just really trying to tap into what you need right then. So it might really just be taking 3 breaths outside during your lunch break. Like that's self-care. Like I'm not telling you to go, massages are great, retreats are great. Like that's all wonderful, but that's not what I'm teaching. I'm trying to get people to see that these moments built into our day will compound and build into us knowing what we need when we need it.
Yeah, there probably is a concept almost of you have to start from zero and recalculate the opportunity cost in a
Mm-hmm.
way. And I could see, I think one of the terms you use to describe that it's a cycle, right? And there is a concept of, say, well, I can't commit the time to XYZ that's more for my self-care because there's an opportunity cost of then I don't have time to give really great feedback on these papers I'm grading or something like that. But also, the opportunity cost if you don't do that is then my lesson tomorrow is not as good as it should be. And now, this cycle continues versus kind of saying, okay, we need to start here, start now, and moving forward, then doing the right things now will lead into better outcomes tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And then eventually we'll come back around to next time I'm grading papers, I'll be much more energized and I'll be able to really give that substantive feedback or differentiate the next day based on where I see my students are because I have begun the positive cycle, right? Versus it's really hard. You have to start somewhere. And if I'm always looking back at what I think the opportunity cost was for that thing, then I'm not actually anticipating maybe the more valuable opportunities that are still to come.
I love that. And I like to encourage teachers to schedule their time for themselves first. So instead of saying I'll get to it later, like I'll schedule it now. So even those small moments, like you said, starting from zero, what's the smallest thing I can do in order to move forward with this? Like not, oh, I need to do all these things and I need to get to the gym each day. Like we don't need to go there. It can just be very simple, scheduling that time for yourself, with yourself. And if you have to miss it, rescheduling it just like you would with a friend, just like you would any other appointment. So just treating yourself in that way, I think scheduling and just treating yourself as you would a friend, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it. And now, looking at the book and some of the specific content, obviously we're only going to scratch the surface here, but one of the pieces that's really foundational is your Four Noble Truths of Teaching.
Mhm.
And of course, there's a lot to this, and this is really core to your work, so we can't cover all of it here. But I do think, because of what you write about, that once teachers understand these, it's very empowering, and these are really a through line in a lot of these practices. It would be great if you could briefly talk a little bit about how you develop these and just, what they are and how they kind of fit into your approach.
So this is not something that I came up originally on my own. This is something from Buddhism, actually, but obviously this is a very secular book. But I just looked at this in a lot of the studies that I did as I was trying to work my way out of my own burnout and increase my health and well-being. I saw these Four Noble Truths, and I thought this is a really great journey that teachers could also go on. Whereas the first noble truth talks about life, teaching life, being full of stress and demands. I think we can all agree on that. And then the second noble truth, much of our teacher stress comes from things we can't control, like external factors, which think about a teacher, how much we have so little control over. And then the third noble truth is that there is a way to lessen this stress and live a more balanced teaching life, that there is a solution, and the solution is that we can focus on what we can control. And that's what I really try to talk about most in this book, is that when we look at what's going on in our teaching lives, what can we actually control? And then put our focus there. The rest of it, yes, we'll get to. But if we only focus on the things that are beyond our control, we're going to feel powerless and even worse than we already feel to begin with. So that fourth noble truth is the way from to serenity and calm, is to focus on these internal factors, these things that we can control, and put our effort and time into that.
Yeah, and often, of course, when we think about finding the calm in the chaos, like you can't control that it's sometimes chaotic, right? But there's the internal factors of how you approach it and what's going on in your mind that you can control. And that's obviously a really broad picture, but even just into how it all fits in, I mean, we can only control what we control and change what we can change. And yet understanding these things piece by piece is how you take one step at a time to being, feeling more effective. And another thing that really stood out to me, and I think particularly because I think it's often on the surface, probably not well understood, is the power of positivity that you write about.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's worth an introduction here and kind of explaining, whether everybody can do this, because I think some people would think of this as either being naive or quote unquote cheery, right? It's that person who's just always like seems happy to be there. But realistically, like that's not what you're talking about. It means something very different. And, I know people who are generally optimistic or even keeled, positive people that are not on the surface somebody you would just say, well, that's the happy person or whatever, right? There's much more to it than that. So I would, love to just have an opportunity to talk about how can everybody approach this and make this a part of their, their mindset, even if they don't think of, whatever the general connotation is of positive.
Yeah, so even in the book, I think I wrote a section called "Positivity is not Pollyanna." So I know that was coming. That people are going to say like, "Oh, that means you want to be happy all the time," and that's so far from what positivity practice shows us. What I think people can be hopeful about is that if you just think you're a negative person, like you actually can change the way your brain functions. Like there's a lot of research that's been done on neuroplasticity and all of those things where you can actually change the way your brain works. And doing something as simple as just at the end of your day, writing down 3 great things that happened or 3 positive things that happened, it will do wonders for the way that you look at your life, because our brain was designed to protect us. So it naturally looks for the negative, and that's not a bad thing. It's there, it's doing it to protect us. It used to protect us from really, really horrible things like saber-toothed tigers and things like that. Our brain still functions the same way. It's looking for the negative to protect us. But if we can start to show and to actually incline our mind to the positive, it has been shown that we will be much better workers. We will be much more productive when we're doing the work that we're doing. We will be much better communicators. So it goes beyond just like put on a smiley face. It's certainly, that's not what I'm saying. And also it's not, there's not a problem with looking at things how they are, but then trying to see like, what can I learn from this? You know, instead of like, this is terrible, but more like, this is terrible, but what can I do with this situation that maybe could make it not so terrible? What can I learn from failing or not succeeding in this realm? And doing this sort of practice is amazing for students to see or to participate in as well, because, you know, they're living in the same world we are. They're living with the same brains we have. So they're inclined to looking at the negative as well. And when we can open up our minds enough to look for the positive and seek that out, it opens us up to being so much more productive members of society.
I could also see, I mean, there's like a relationship between even things like assessment. When you think about formative versus summative assessment, right? And it's like this is formative. We're looking for the lessons we can take from this and what can we learn that helps us to continue improving. It's not about saying that everything's perfect the way it is, but it's also saying that let's not give ourselves a final evaluation here before we're done. I'm sure everybody would agree with the emphasis that we have on making sure every student is successful and equity and all of these things that are really important. That if in your classroom you have 20 students and 10 of them are doing really well and 10 of them aren't, that if you just said, well, you know, these 10 are doing great, so I'm happy, everything's great, you know, that wouldn't be correct. But also, you know, let's not say, well, I'm a failure because these 10 are struggling. And, you know, it's saying, okay, these ones are really succeeding. What am I doing that's working? What's, you know, how can I try something new with these others? Okay, now I'm encouraged because I can see where I've been successful, and I also can see where we need to try some new things. And it's, you know, it's I could see the relationship there, right, between that mindset. And it's not about ignoring reality or ignoring areas that really still require improvement, because I'm sure if there was a teacher who was doing that, that wouldn't be a very good teacher, because there would be a lot of things getting neglected. And yet the teacher who's going to ultimately be successful is the one who's saying, okay, what's a good lesson I can take from this, and how can I just come back tomorrow, right, with a renewed energy to say, okay, great, I think I know what we're going to try. And that's really what needs to happen, because otherwise who can sustain the energy to keep coming back the next day and the next day if you're not able to take those things?
That's a wonderful, I love that you just gave that example, because that's exactly, I went through that exact same situation in my classroom. One of my classes this year was, I had that ratio, and I remember getting so upset. And that's exactly what I did. Was I was like, okay, what is going well for the kids who are doing well? And it changed my perception. Did I have to like recalibrate again and yeah, it didn't just like, oh, everything's great now. No, it wasn't. It was actually one of the toughest classes I've taught in 20 years of teaching. And but that day, I remember that day when I kind of just flipped that script, and I was like, all right, what can I do that's working? And how can I reach the other kids and not just focus on the kids that it's not working for? And how can I transfer some of that stuff? So that's a great example.
We talked a lot, of course, importantly about, with individual teachers and how they can kind of get involved and sort of think about some of these mindsets around mindfulness and commit to these approaches. And even at the school level, how administrators can really encourage it and put that into place, which is extremely important. Like teachers really do need to feel like they're supported and encouraged to practice self-care and mindfulness, or else if they feel like they're being negatively judged for it. If anybody in any profession feels that way, then they're probably not going to do it, or they're not going to stay in that profession. But there's even a bigger picture to this that I'd love to close on as an entire profession. I mean, fortunately, there are things that you're working on and that you're working with educators on that are within an individual's control to put into place and to say, okay, I'm going to practice these things and it's going to help me be more effective, happier, more balanced, have a longer and better and more fulfilling career. But there also is just an urgency with why, as a system, we need to prioritize this. And, you know, relatedly, I mean, we've seen some of this exacerbated by the pandemic with a lot of teachers leaving the profession in large numbers, but it's a trend that's been ongoing for a long time. And as we've talked about, the end result of what you're doing as an educator is on the bet, on the behalf of your students. And so if we don't have enough teachers, if we don't have experienced teachers and it's constant turnover and everybody's brand new and just kind of learning how to do the job, ultimately that means that in large numbers we're not best serving learners. And this is a huge factor, perhaps the number one factor that can help that or hurt it. Of course, there's various other things. There's training, there's pay, but realistically, like that's not what is making the decision, I think, for most teachers about whether or not they see a future in the profession. It's about, is this going to be healthy for me? Is it fulfilling? Do I feel supported? Do I feel encouraged? I would love to just speak to, at the system level, like, why is there so much urgency? Why do we need to create urgency around saying, like, this needs to be the norm for every teacher? This is not just something that we should be leaving up to just simply individual choice, and some will do it and some won't, because I don't know that, I mean, that doesn't seem like it's going to be effective or really acceptable, right? And it really creates a difficult dynamic whereby it shouldn't require courage to be well. It shouldn't require that you have to go against the trend or the norm to say, well, I'm going to do this. I mean, everybody should really feel like it's what they should be doing. So that's a very long way of phrasing the question. But, from your perspective, I mean, this is what you do and this is what you've seen in your entire career. What is the urgency around this, just as far as saying, like, if we don't do this, students will suffer, and that's what it's about.
If I can answer this question, I guess I'm going to solve a lot of problems, right?
Please do. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that's been missing, even pre-pandemic, is teachers having a seat at the table. Teachers having a voice beyond their classroom and beyond their school district. I think that, in my experience, that has been something that has been very frustrating. And I've seen it and I've heard it, and you see it in a district, and you see it at a federal level. Like, there needs to be more actual teachers having a seat at the table to make and decisions about their own professional development, about what really needs to be done. And another thing that I would love to see is a lot of the administrators and higher up than that actually doing the work that we're asking teachers to do in regard to self-care and well-being. Because I oftentimes think that it feels different when somebody else is telling you something to do when they don't do it themselves. So I think that having bold administrators, bold people in positions of power in our education system that want to say, like, let's do this a little differently. Like, what we've been doing hasn't been working. I know that's a really simple answer, but perhaps if more people start from the top, start to do this work, and then we're doing this work from the bottom up, we can meet in the middle and we're all like on the same page for once. I know that's a probably very simplistic way to look at it, but I feel that that's what's needed in my eyes.
Yeah, that really is important, and that's something that I've had a lot of opportunity to think about and try to work toward with things like this, of course, with publishers that are putting out great books written by teachers, with podcasts and online media and things that are saying that we really need teacher voice, and we need every stakeholder voice. We need student voice, we need teachers, we need parents, we need administrators, we need everybody to be in one consistent conversation, not just talking amongst themselves, but together to understand and really empathize with the challenges that one another are going through. And again, it does come back to a lot of things with the pandemic, and hopefully some positive ways that has influenced perspectives and given parents, for example, a new opportunity to observe closely some of the things the teachers are doing and challenged by in the work that's happening because of remote learning and things like that. And hopefully that will lead into these conversations happening more productively, and understanding that as people who are in quote unquote leadership positions, whether at the school level or above, that if they're not able to prioritize the things that are most beneficial to teachers, then it's making their job much more difficult as well. Like, no principal wants to have their staff and their faculty turnover routinely, and ultimately we also know that that's not the best way to deliver an effective education. So thank you so much, Danielle, for being here and really introduce a lot of our listeners to these important ideas, and hopefully expand understanding for others who have given some thought to these. And as we said earlier, we really only have scratched the surface. So listeners, please do learn much more about Danielle's book, The Path of the Mindful Teacher, in the show notes below. And also you can visit her website, teachingwell.life, to learn a lot more about her other work. And Danielle, so thanks again for being here, and really we wish you great luck with this book as it's brand new on the market.